Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you're having a great day, and it's an honor to introduce our next three panelists together. The first panel discussion that we are going to have on what will you do with all the wealth. And we have three wonderful people in the panel. Most of the people in the social startup segment, like me, look forward to them, and they're kind of mentors. And I welcome Amit Chandra, who is the chairman of Bain Capital Mumbai, and India's one of India's most generous philanthropists. He has been a trustee of Tata Trust, a founding board member of Ashoka University, a board member of Give India, Akanksha Foundation. He's also a member of the advisory board of Britspan India and Swadesh Foundation. Then we have Ujjwal Thakur, who has spent 4 decades as a leader in the banking and consulting and not-for-profit world. Currently, he chairs the board of Educate Girls and sits on the board of Ummeed, Arogya World, Shoshit Seva Kendra. He's a partner in the social incubator Encore and a mentor to many young social entrepreneurs like me. In fact, his reflection posts after every meeting with a social entrepreneur is quite a hit among everybody to read. Then we have Bindi Dharia, who is the Deputy Director of Center for Social Impact and Philanthropy at Ashoka University. She has previously worked with Tata Trust, Piramal Foundation. She holds a master's degree in engineering from University of Michigan and an MBA from Harvard Business School. Really looking forward to some insights and a lot of words of wisdom on how much do we need, how do we define what is our wealth. And over to you folks. Welcome again.
Thank you, Ashish.
Thank you, Ashish.
Thank you, Ashish.
Namaste, everybody. Wish you all a very happy Danutsav, and it's a great opportunity for us to also reflect on Gandhiji's ideals today. It's a privilege for me to be here today with two of my good friends, Ujjwal and Bindi, and I hope we have a robust conversation, and we end that with a good, vibrant discussion, and all of you post your questions as we go along, and we get a chance to answer some of them. Let me start this discussion with Bindi. Bindi, there's a widespread and, in my view, a somewhat misplaced notion in our society that only wealthy businessmen, and I use that term in a very narrow sense because I'm not saying business persons, I'm saying businessmen, and those who are kind of Khandani inheritors can really be generous. You seem to break all those molds, as Ashish described you. You're a professional, you're a woman, and yet in your 40s, again, people think that, generous giving should happen once one loses hair or becomes gray. You've chosen to give away, start giving away half your wealth at your prime. So you've broken a lot of molds. It would be great to kick off this conversation with you. If you can tell us about what is it in your upbringing, what faulty genes do you have, what is it in your life's experiences that have made Bindi what she is, such a different human being from so many others, and such an inspiration.
Sure. So actually, thank you for inviting. I think it's a big honor just to be at the same space talking with Amit and Ujjwal. Both are my mentors, the same way Ashish said they are his. I've gone for advice to them at different times in my career. I think this day itself is so special. At home for us, this was the day we went shopping. I think my grandfather, both my grandparents are big Gandhians. And we grew up actually going out to Khadi Bandar and buying clothes on this day. So for us, this day was very special. But Amit, you're right. I do come from a business family. My father's a businessman, but he's a self-made businessman, a really small, like a medium business. And my grandfather used to run a press. So we come from a very middle-class family who didn't have anything and are very self-made in that sense. Not like I had, any requirements that my dad's not fulfilled growing up, but I've seen him work hard, build his factory, and get where he has been. And I think we grew up in a house where giving was the norm. I don't think it was a choice that you made, you just did it. Like our birthdays was spent, I used to go give, I think, have ice cream or apples within the orphans. We Dad used to take us around. I remember in the city when we complained and said, "Look at the kids studying for IIT. You have no right to complain. You live in a house with a roof and you have food on your table." So that's the kind of upbringing we had, where sort of that guilt was brought in the thought process, but it was also with the values that giving is a part of nature. My grandparents, both freedom fighters, both Gandhians, sort of followed Gandhi's values to the T, right? Wore khadi till the day they died. They talked about the values of saying that you need to be a better human being. I mean, the whole idea was that what you earn, you give. And you don't hoard. I think like you work hard, you live a nice life. Food is meant to just sustain yourself, and then the rest of it, you give back to society as a good human being. Because I think when you go up there, you're evaluated not by how much you give at the temple, but how you are to other people around you. And so that's essentially what we grew up with. And I think I remember Dada, when we grew up, would take us to the village in Gujarat where he built the hospital, built schools for schools and hostels for women. So I think there was no choice. I mean, you were brought up there, and that's pretty much it. And so when also growing up, did it. I think even when I worked in the for-profit space for ArcelorMittal, I worked on the side for the Girls and Boys Club, and it just seemed natural. So when I figured out I could make a career in the social sector, it was a no-brainer. Like I feel so much meaning in life. And so that's essentially why giving away also doesn't feel like a lot. Not like I have a lot of money. To be honest, I probably made that cutoff of 1 CR just about now. And so I thought, why not? I might as well start planning right now. I'm not in my 40s, actually, I'm still in my 30s. So, but I'm putting away money now systematically, saying that I don't want to spend more. And I can actually start putting it away and work towards just having as much as I need. And the rest can go back to where it should go. I'm one person. How much can I possibly require in life? So that's pretty much, that's how it is. So
Bindi, what a wonderful example. And you made so many profound statements for a person who's not hit 40 yet. I don't think people even 20 years on your age would make some of these statements. I think many deep, even deep religious and spiritual teachers would say that really the best temple is actually society and those who are most underprivileged in society. And our first duty actually lies to them, as opposed to going and trying to bribe our gods in whatever physical structures we believe they reside in. So I think that was one big takeaway I had from your from your remarks, and of course the fact that seeing people who really fought for our freedom early on in life really resulted in some values being instilled in you. And I really wonder, therefore, what sort of values we are instilling in the next generation at this point of time and what role that really plays. We all need to be very reflective of that. Let me move to the Bhishma Pitama of the social sector, Ujjwal Thakkar. It's a little intimidating asking him questions because, normally he has people half my age asking questions, and he's so I feel a little odd asking him questions, and he provides me generally great advice. I'm just pulling Ujjwal's leg. He and I have have this unique relationship going back many, many years. Ujjwal, for people who've known Usha and you, you've always been a really large-hearted couple. You made the unusual choice, first to, after being a successful person in the corporate world, to give of yourself, all your time at Pratham, then at Give India, and then serve on boards of, many organizations. And very importantly, do what you do now, which is really mentor a lot of people in the social space. And I know there are literally hundreds of people out there who count you as a father figure. The choice to give away half your wealth jointly that Usha and you made has been a relatively new decision. What made you take that decision, and explain to us what role your family played in that?
Thank you, Amit. Very good question. The simple answer to that question is influencers like you and Venkat. Good company always leads to good decisions. I agonized with the thought for a long, long time. When Venkat first asked me, I had the usual insecurities of all people of my age. I was close to 70 then, I'm 70 now. I don't have a pension, so I depend on my savings. So the decision was, I would say, not easy, but being influenced by good people like yourself, the answer became easier. And also faith in the fact that Upparwala has always come to my assistance when I needed it. So if something were to go wrong, I did a lot of modeling. I made my calculation saying how much will I need, what are the variables. All of that leads you to a point to say, yes, maybe you're right. But faith is what ultimately pushed me to make that decision. And of course, goading by Venkat time and again, reminding me gently, not so gently, saying, when are you signing? All of these things help. So the decision, I confess, was not easy. I took the longest time on the decision. When I went to Usha, she said, yeah, that's obvious. But, and I was using Usha as the excuse for not making the decision. And I hadn't even discussed it with her till I got all my facts right. And the second part of it was discussing with children, which was even easier. They said, Dad, you made the money. You've done your duties by us. So what's the big deal? Do what you want. We don't need your money. And if that makes you happy, go ahead and do it. So in a sense, the decision started much earlier when I joined Pratham. I was in the corporate world for 28 years. And one of the things when I took my last job as country head of BNP Paribas, I told all my one-downs that for 5 years' time, I'm going to join the NGO sector, so one of you will become the head. And I had no clue at that point in time what NGOs were about, which NGO I want to join, what sector I want. I just had this thought that God has been kind, I need to give back. And in my mind, somewhere giving back correlated with joining an NGO and doing some work. So the thought is old. The decision to join the sector was a force majeure decision in the sense that I was heading the retail business of BNP Paribas and they decided to shut it down. So rather than go to the corporate world, I said, let me precipitate and take the decision 3 years ahead of time. I was to do it at 55, I did it at 52 and took the plunge. Like everything that I do, don't discuss, debate too much. On a gut basis, ho jayega, ho jayega. And it was the best decision of my life. Joining Pratham, working there for 6 years, then joining Give India. What Pratham taught me was the inequities that exist in this country and the simple solutions to it, the passion with which people do it. What Give India taught me was how to get citizens involved in these problems. And a combination of the two really led to my post-retirement idea, that it was clear to me that the youth of this country can transform the space. And youth need mentors. I mean, very simply, youth needs mentors. So I said, when I turn 60, I will not do any full-time work. And I will do only unpaid work with the social sector. If somebody gives me an advisory position in the corporate world, I'll charge them for it. So that's the long history. But I mean, you come from the dog-eat-dog world of investment banking and private equity. What inspired you to get into so much giving? And a supplementary question to that, if Archana wasn't your wife, would this have happened?
Thanks for putting me on the hot seat. I thought that was my job. No, I think, a little bit going back to Bindi's answer, this journey does begin early, is what I have discovered. That for, something does get seeded early on. You can call it values, you can call it experiences, one gets that shapes one's life. And I think for me as well, I think the journey began early. I was very clear in life that as and when I had something, that I was blessed with. I also, like Bindi and usual, come from a middle class family. And I had a deep sense that, the biggest privilege I had was actually values and education. My higher education was paid for by others. And I never lost a deep sense of gratitude for that. And so I was clear that when there was going to be some sort of payday in my life, that I wanted to enable opportunity just the way opportunity enabled me. And when I went to the US for my business education, I saw that there was actually a lot of responsibility to society and a lot of giving that people who were wealth creators had engaged in, and a lot more than what I saw actually in our society. And that did not escape me. And so when I came back, and I was very fortunate, I got married to Archana, and she agreed with that. So even when in our first few years as a married couple, while we didn't have much disposable income, we actually started giving back to education and enabling those who were less privileged through some sort of scholarships. And that kept giving, that giving kept increasing as we got more and I grew through my career. At some point of time, we started supplementing that with time. And actually, we realized when we started spending time, both of us, that it was a very fulfilling journey. And along with giving more time, giving more money also increased. There were other inflection points along the way. We, like you, met amazing influencers in our lives. I've had some remarkable influencers who I met, and whose work I read, Chuck Feeney, Guru Nanak, Mark Selvin, a person, Venkat Krishnan, got to India, whose book Power by Half actually really influenced a lot of our thinking as well. At some point of time, you began to think about what really the purpose of wealth was. And so there were lots of inflection points where the giving kept then increasing. And I think like you, Ujjwal, I think, it's been a family decision all the way, and we've actually worked together as partners in keeping on increasing both our time as well as our share of giving on a continuous basis. And I think the one thing we have done consciously is make sure that we don't get onto a materialistic rat race and look at whichever sector we are in, what somebody else is doing, and let ourselves be influenced by that. You can choose who your influences are. Let me now move to the second section of our conversation. And, all of us have chosen a benchmark to give at least half, if not more, of what we are, blessed with. So let me in this section actually begin with you, Ujjwal. Look, for 10 years, you were giving all of your time. And I do believe giving time is hugely valuable. Actually, I tell a lot of people who are social entrepreneurs that they've made a choice to give with their time. And that is, we have to all in society be incredibly grateful for that. And I think for 10 years, the fact is that you were making a conscious decision to give with your time. But at some point of time, as you articulated, you basically made this switch and you've made this decision to give at least half your money as well. Help us understand, Ujjwal, how did you get comfortable with the number half? Was there math that you did to decide that you had enough? You could have given 25% and still it would have been a large number. You could have given 10%, and even that's actually 10 times above the average Indian. Did you need to run a spreadsheet to make sure for the remainder of your life you have enough? Just help us think through this process, because lots of people get stuck on, do I have enough for the rest of my life? So help us understand that process.
Ujjwal, you're on mute.
I said it's a question I still struggle with on the spreadsheets and things like that. Never sure that whether I made the right calculations or not. But to step back, really the journey for me started giving time. In the last 10 years, I've been engaged full-time with the sector, with different people in the sector, and I watch their lives, the lives of social entrepreneurs, and how enriching it is for themselves personally, and how much they contribute to the welfare of the world. Now, giving time is what increases involvement in the sector. I mean, before that, I worked for 8 years in the sector itself. But to me, the more rewarding part started after retirement, when I spoke to multiple people doing different things and with equal passion. So somewhere this whole thought about giving more started there. So many people are giving their lives to committing their full lives to doing something good for others. Can't we do a little bit? So that's where it started. And then, of course, like I said to you in my earlier round, that it was influence of people like yourself who lead by example. Venkat, the goading. When Venkat asked me the first time, I thought about it, but I thought very negatively about it. In the sense, I said, "Ki, boss, this is not for me. Pension nahi hai, ye nahi hai. Kya karunga?" Then, when he asked me a second time, I knew he was serious, and Venkat being Venkat is not going to give up on anything that he starts. So then I started putting boundary conditions to what is it? How much will it take to live for the rest of my life? And I came to a number, right or wrong. I said 1 lakh rupees a month is good for me and Usha to live on comfortably, and 1 lakh corrected for inflation for the first 5 years. And beyond that, I had to factor inflation of 5 to 6% per year. But so 1 lakh rupees for living, annually 6 lakh rupees for a holiday, 18 lakh rupees is what I said I would require to lead a life that I've been leading in the past. Not jazzy, but very comfortable. I mean, nothing missing, nothing wanting. The only other thing there was what happens in the case of a medical emergency. So I said, okay, how much will a medical emergency cost? I said, put away 1 crore of rupees for medical emergency. Just don't think about it as your money at all. And so the emergency, I mean, medical is taken care of. It's not going to, even in today's cost, really seriously cost you more than 1 crore. And that 1 crore will hopefully grow over the years to take care of the inflation in medical costs. So that is still the largest worry. I mean, reading some of the horror stories that one does today about medical bills, it's a concern, but no longer such a concern. I inherited an apartment from my dad, and I said that apartment is my medical loan. If I will never sell it, I will not hire it also. But if anything happens, my insurance is there. So once you come on to these terms, then things become easy. How much can inflation be? The other factor that one needs to consider is how much will interest rates drop? What kind of a return can you get on your investment? I have based my logic on a 5% return on investment, which I'm aware can drop to 2%. But even at 2%, I'm protected. And worst comes to worst. I mean, if I live beyond 90, then I can pray. But I think 85 to 90 years of age span, which is what I had to derive because my dad lived to 91, my mom lived to 84. So taking an average 85, 86 has to be planned for. So I think I'm taken care of. Not a luxurious life. It's a very comfortable life. And that's all you need. And as you grow older, your needs become lower and lower. And if a corona hits, they become almost zero. So that's the long answer to a short question.
Bindi, how did you think about what is enough, and come up with an answer to this question?
So for me, just a caveat out there, I'm a Gujarati, so kind of somewhere miserly in the way I spend. But I think I did the math, right? So I have been working now for easily about 12 to 15 years, 12 odd years, I guess. I still have loans, like education loans. But for me, the math was easy in the sense, one, because my education loans, luckily I went to a school that supports me because I work in the social sector. So that in some sense is paid off. I mean, there are way more people out there who are supporting people like me to study at one of the best schools and still get that money back. So that math, I was like, my loan is paid off. I had systematically over the years, this is advice a younger cousin gave me years ago, to say every paycheck you get, put 30% away. There was no logic why 30%, but he had told me, he was an accountant, he did the math, he said. So I have been systematically putting at least 30% away, and I live my life. I am not saying I don't. I live in a really nice house in Gurgaon. I travel internationally. I travel in India a couple times. I mean, you can see I'm sitting in the mountains right now. So it's not like I'm giving away. I'm just not spending like I don't indulge more than what I need. And so I realize I'm anyways putting away about close to 30 to 40% of my whatever income I make. So I did that math, and then I realized, what do I need if I invest this money, like which is 30 to 40% systematically, and I will continue to earn. Hopefully, like Ujjwal said, his father lived till like 90. My grandfather lived till 97. And I think in our family most have lived like that way, and so if we continue to live as much, and if I can work, my dad is close to 70, he continues to work full time. So if I continue to work as much, then I can systematically put away money. And I'm not even talking inheritance, right? My father sort of just said he's never used what my grandfather gave him, and he tells us we don't use what he and mom are giving us right now. So if I am putting that much money away, then I can easily give it away. I also did the math to say I'm single right now. If in future at any point of time I get married and I have a child, how much will it cost me, right? Like if I have to support the child, say till 20 odd years, and then the child goes ahead and does whatever, I still don't need as much. I mean, a couple of lakhs, I get a lakh a month also if I send them to good schools. I can still sustain myself making the money that I'm making right now. And I'm a development sector professional who doesn't necessarily make as much. but it's still enough to put away and give back. And so that, I mean, like I'm saying, I live my life, I live a fairly decent life, and still I'm able to put away that much money. So I'm not making, and which is what I tell most people, you don't have to make concessions in life to give away. Like even if you start at 30%, there is enough that we hoard in the bank for I don't know what. So I mean, I think that money should anyways go back from where it came. So it just makes sense.
Yeah, I think, like the two of you, we actually also did, Archana and I did a lot of math around this. And I would urge anyone who's thinking about these kind of decisions to not take them on a whim. You may be goaded by someone, you may be inspired by someone, but it's important to be responsible to yourself and to your family when you're taking these kind of decisions. But my learnings along the way have been a few, and I think some of them have been encapsulated by both Ujjwal and Bindi. I think the first thing is, while you may live your life's desires, there's tremendous value in living life somewhat frugally, in not being flamboyant in one's tastes, and not being on some sort of materialistic rat race with people around you. Ujjwal asked, for example, I come from a dog-eat-dog world. Many people in my industry are, buying their third house, fourth house, in some cases, investing in amazing trophies, be it cars and yachts, etc. Archana and I were very clear that we would limit the lifestyle that we had reached at some point of time 10, 15 years ago, and not expand that, and use everything that we got beyond that point for greater good of society. So I think the first thing I have learned in life is that if you define what is enough for yourself, that introduces great amount of flexibility in your ability to give. I think the second thing which Bindi talked about which is very good advice, is the earlier you start putting away some part of your money into investments, and not differentiate investments from trading, but just sensible investing, diversified portfolio of assets. It's amazing how much they compound and provide you a buffer for things that you might need later on in life, including your ability to give away more generously. And that has been my learning as well. I think there are a few other things that I've learned along the way that are important as well, which is you have to plan for contingencies. I think, but you have to plan for them in a manner in which they're not ridiculous. Once I remember having the conversation about giving away wealth with a friend of mine, and he said, like Ujjwal talked about, health emergencies. He was very worried about health emergencies. And he said, what if my daughter gets bone marrow cancer and I have to take her to this particular hospital in Italy, and the treatment there costs a few $1 million. Now, if you're going to think that way, you're never going to give money. But you can think about buying insurance policies for your family, and those cost a few lakh rupees a year. Or you can put away, on the flip side, any reasonable amount to basically cover yourself. So I think if you're reasonable, if you have intent to give, you will find ways to be reasonable with what your needs are. And then that unlocks the ability for you to give. And that's been a big part of my learning as well. And we did that exercise between Archana and me over a decade ago, and capped our needs. And that has allowed us to then be able to, give a lot more, with a lot more flexibility, and do the things that we've been able to do. Let me now move to the next section of this conversation, which is building hope. I think particularly in today's times, I think we need a lot of that. It's tough to find good news these days, whether on social media or any form of media. So I think I'm going to push all of us hard to think about how we can use our wealth, whether it's our time or money, to really build hope. And let me start actually, Bindi, with you. Look, our problems are big, they are complicated, and none of us are billionaires. I wish we were, but we aren't. If we were billionaires, we all would have had at least 500 million to give. But maybe can you talk about an example to bring it alive, where you think your money has made a meaningful difference, and that can really demonstrate that if there were, tens of thousands of Bindis out there, how problems could be addressed at scale?
Yeah. So, Amit, actually, I'm going to steal your idea, because this is something I learned from one of your speeches when I heard the first time when you spoke somewhere. And you said, I give a little, and that instigates somebody else to give a lot more. And which I've seen you systematically do through your foundation as well, where I think the fact that you back it makes a lot more people back it, right? And what I've realized over the years, I'm not saying I'm that well known, but the fact is that I work in the social sector, and I've done for the last 7 years. There's a credibility that you bring to the table, that I've heard friends come and say, Bindi, if you are giving money to a cause, I will give money. So wherever you say, I will give that money. And that has sort of inspired what I realized, a cascade effect, that, if I give a little bit and then put it out there, it will make a huge difference. So if I might just say what's happened in the last 6 months, right, with COVID and everything that happened, like when the migration workers and Goon started this campaign of just raising money, I thought I would just raise a little bit. I put it out there on Facebook saying, I'll match whatever, people give, like 10%, which wasn't a lot of money, maybe a lakh or two out of my pocket. But I ended up raising in like a week or so about 5 lakhs or a little more than that. But what I also saw in the weeks after, multiple friends actually put out the same raises. So in the process, I think we ended up raising, I don't know how many lakhs. So, I mean, if you have close to 10 or maybe 100 Bindis out there, and if it's just 5 lakhs that each one of raises from friends and family, it's a substantial amount of money that can make a huge difference to any organization out there. Because I think the numbers, it's great when somebody like a Ratan Tata comes and gives a 50 crores, but that's equally possible for 1,000 Bindis to give, right? And there is more than enough 1,000 Bindis out there who can give 5 out of their pocket or 5 from friends and family. So I think that's highly possible, and that's what I believe in. So,
Bindi, you make a great point actually, and for people out there, I would urge you to read Sattva's report on matching grants, where actually they have systematically studied the power of matching grants, both in India and overseas, and demonstrated that if people organize matching grants and within their friend circle, within their social circle at large, it boosts the amount of money that can be raised by anywhere between 2 to 8 times, because people who are sitting on the fence tend to come forward. Those who have already decided often will give a lot more. And this is one of the most powerful ways to enhance retail giving and high net worth giving. So I would urge everyone out there to read that report. There's also a toolkit that Sattva has developed for social sector entrepreneurs that they can actually adopt to maximize the benefits of what Bindi just articulated. Ujjwal, let me pose the same question to you. Can you think of an example where a large, complicated problem, you can see progress being made with your giving, thanks to your involvement?
Very recent example, if I were to give, this is post-COVID. It's Project Mumbai had put out a request saying we want volunteers. So Shishir wanted volunteers, and the previous day, a guy called Ruben Mascarenas had called me to say, Ujjwal, I want to do something in this. What can I do? these are my skills. So I got onto a call with Shishir and Ruben, and we started chatting, and we talked about migrant labor and feeding them. Ruben and his friend Patik have access to kitchens. So they said, we can create food and this. So in my mind, I said, well, what does it take to start? 1,000 meals if I underwrite, they can get started. Actually, in my mind, I'd said 10 days of 1,000 meals, but to tell them, I said, you start with 1,000 meals, I'm paying the first 25,000 rupees, and we'll figure out how this goes. And to cut a long story short, in the next 6 weeks, we have served 3 million meals, spent about close to 7 crores. And I have not had to give more than the first 25,000 rupees that I gave. So that really was something amazing that happened very, very recently. Other stories around starting small are long-term stories. I mean, for example, I was the incubating mentor for Gandhi Fellowship. When it was an idea, Aditya and we got together. And I actually used to pick up, not from my personal money, but Pratham as the CEO, I said, I'll pick up the salaries of 5-6 people, whatever team you want to build, no questions asked. You just go ahead and build the team. I have faith in you. And today, you know what the Gandhi Fellowship is. I mean, they've transformed education. Bindi has worked there. Thousands of fellows have become entrepreneurs, have joined multiple social development sector activities. So having faith in people and investing either your time or money in whatever way you can leads to a force multiplier, huge multiplier. I mean, but you've done this far more often than I have. Why don't you tell us some of your stories?
No, I think, look, like both of you have realized, and honestly, for me, it's been more about getting than giving. Because each time I've been involved in one of these efforts, I've really, at the end of it, wondered whether it's whether I've given or I've actually gotten back. And I can think of so many. I mean, Ashoka, amazing one where a bunch of us have collectively got together, and it's an amazing institution. And I'm not so sure we really dreamt right at the beginning that what we see today is what would have got created in terms of just the scale and its impact. I would say, even more closer to the ground, the whole issue of agricultural distress and what was happening with farmers suicides and with just deep poverty was an issue which began to impact me a lot in 2013. And I began to see the work being done by Caring Friends, Nimish Bhai. And I began to understand that a large part of it was because of water security in drought-prone areas. And Nimish Bhai and I started working very closely on rejuvenation of water bodies, and helping just farmers rejuvenate their own water bodies with the help of NGOs. And we realized it was such a powerful technique where just the topsoil that they had lost, which was the silt which had gone into their neighboring water body, they could go and reclaim with little bit of help from people like us, and then spread that silt back into their fields. And we did, over a period of a couple of years, 50, 60 water bodies. And eventually the learnings were so powerful that we realized that we could really build it into a movement. And over the last 5-6 years, that has resulted in over 7,000 water bodies being rejuvenated across multiple states. And, just building that collaborative and working with farmers and seeing how all that you need to do is really play a catalyst role in, in enabling people to find their own way out of what really has been misery, which has existed for decades. It can really be extremely fulfilling. So, personally, I think there are so many amazing opportunities that I feel privileged to just have been a part of.
Wonderful.
Yeah. I'm conscious I want to leave enough time for questions, but we have about few minutes left. So I'm going to get into the rapid fire round, but I'm not going to try to do a Karan Johar on the two of you, because I know Ujjwal will put me on the hot seat as well. And I also don't have a coffee hamper. So I'm going to just ask, each one of us to just give a 1 minute, takeaway to the audience, to everyone who's logged in, on like a message on what would you like them to leave today, with a message on what should they do with their, with their wealth. And Pindi, if you'd like to kick that off.
Why don't we start with you, Amit, and then Ujjwal?
Oh my God.
That's why she went to Harvard, you see.
Yeah. So, look, my message would be very simple. And I'm completely unoriginal. I believe that we should give while we live. And that's something that one of my inspirations, Chuck Feeney, has taught me. My other inspiration is Guru Nanak, who basically said "Kirat kar vanchak," which is, we should work hard, honestly, and give generously. And for me, when he said give generously, it means we should give to our fullest ability, but I think importantly, give with compassion as well. And not have any ego in the process. So for me, I think those are the two tenets. I don't want to die rich by any yardstick. I want to make sure that my daughter and wife are taken care of. With whatever I've accomplished, but society should get it more than its fair share of whatever I've been blessed with.
Go ahead, Ujjwal.
Oh, now you've taken the anchor's role. I thought I was going to push it to you. Oh, okay. I mean, when you look at society and its problems, there are so many big problems to be solved. And there is enough wealth in the world to solve them. And that wealth lies with people like us. So if all of us collectively decide to give, I think 95% of the problems of the universe can get solved. And that faith is important to have, that we are part of the solution, we are not a part of the problem. And that is my message to all of you. Get involved. Start with time if you think money is tougher to do. But when you start with time, money will follow automatically. So get involved is my message.
Okay. I have a slightly different one, and this is actually because of what is happening in the last couple of days. This is something that I told a friend last night, actually. I'm like, stop screaming on social media, stop putting your angst out there and do something about it. And the only way to do something about it is what Ujjwal said, get involved and give your money. Because there is no point of only raising your voice if you don't do something about it, because raising your voice will only get you to one point, and then you will go to the 10x only if you move and give your time and money. So that's what I would say is act, and don't just talk. So I think action is the most important thing, and it's required. So yes, Amit, over to you. I think who gets the coffee hamper, do let us know. I like to win.
I think the coffee hamper goes to Sushant for having organized this session and actually also recovering so well from COVID.
And Ashish, who lives in the back of Beyond in tribal areas and is
I was going to say we'll have the coffee in Ashish's backyard. Excellent. Thank you so much, both of you for having been such thoughtful panelists, making up for my lack of intellectual capability. And let us now begin with, we have time, I think, for Ashish, just let me know how much time we have for questions on the chat line. But I know we've got a lot of questions which have poured in. So I'm going to kick off with a common question that I see both Govind and Rajan Malkani pose, which is, both of them believe that giving time is probably more valuable than giving money. And look, I know, having talked to a lot of social entrepreneurs, that ultimately money, without money kuch chalta nahi hai. So, I personally believe that one needs to give both, but all three of us, I know, give both, but be good to get your perspectives. Either of you can take off on it, on what would be your advice to people who seek advice from you on how to think of the trade-offs between giving time and giving money.
Bindi, you want to kick off?
No, why don't you go ahead?
So, I mean, like I said, it begins with writing a check sometimes. Most of us have written a check when there was a flood or when there was an earthquake or something like that. But that is very peripheral involvement. It's your real depth of contribution begins when you do a combination of money and time. Only giving money or only giving time, I don't think gives you that optimal results that you expect or the transformational change that you want. So my advice is clearly give both, depending on your situation. Some of you might have time, some of you may have money. So those who have money should definitely give money because that is something which is very scarce in the sector. Time is also very important. Time is important from the perspective of many things, from being a listening board to a social entrepreneur, to giving him advice, to giving him your networks. Time plays a role. So it's not one to the exclusion of the other. They're not mutually exclusive. You need to give both, depending on your situation, but definitely give some money and some time.
Bindi, you want to add to that? It was a good comprehensive answer. Or should we move to the next question?
I think we can move to the next question.
Yeah, I think Ujjwal, great answer, Ujjwal. Yeah. I know why people come to you for advice. The second question, actually, Rishi Raj had this question. I know Ashraf Patel had this question as well. Lots of learnings from COVID, and I think it'll be actually great to, once COVID starts settling, hopefully it will in due course, to really reflect more deeply on what the learnings are. But one of the key learnings seems to be on collaboration between, civil society and government, within civil society organizations, between philanthropists and civil society organizations. Can you talk about, from your perspective, how some of this can actually, what we can learn from some of these collaborations that have got built in terms of really from a longer term perspective on problem solving, some of the sticky problems in particular?
Amit, maybe you should answer this, considering that, A.T. Chandra Foundation led a lot of collaborations in Bombay and worked extensively with the government.
Yeah, happy to take it. I mean, look, it's interesting. My perspective is this was a very overwhelming experience initially for me. In some ways, it continues to be. We were fighting a enemy that we couldn't see, and yet it was larger than all of us many, many times over. It was very clear to me that unless we really didn't work at cross purposes, and unless we really collaborated actively, we would really not get anywhere. And collaboration didn't only mean financial collaboration, which is often what people kind of think about, as a dimension of collaboration, but really meant bringing the best that everybody had to offer. And often some of that was unique skills and capability. So we really were fortunate that we were able to build some unique collaborations, and often those collaborations were nothing formal, which was the unique aspect of these collaborations. There was no MOU, there was nothing, no paperwork. This was people getting together very quickly to solve a problem, and it was based on trust, and it wasn't based on who was doing some photo ops somewhere. I mean, I remember one of the first collaborators we built was because people were, thousands of people, tens of thousands of people were going to go hungry in containment zones that got set up right at the beginning of COVID in the slums. And we knew that there would be a massive humanitarian crisis and consequently potentially a law and order crisis. And so 5-6 of us got together. We built a big distribution and logistical center at NSCI, which is now converted into a healthcare facility, where 400 volunteers came together to both gather grains and pack food and then send it into the slums. Tens of tons of grains would come in every day, work 24/7. And this was a collaborative between BMC, NGOs, philanthropists, Mumbai police. And if it wasn't for, and the state government, if it wasn't for multiple agencies coming together and multiple NGOs as well, because each NGO was strong in different part of the slums. So really complicated collaborative. And over a period of a few weeks, we fed 10 million meals. And this was all at a point of time when supply chains in the country had completely broken down. And so there's a lot that we have learned, and we put together a learning document that we then shared with lots of other foundations and the government, etc. But I think we've learned a few things about collaborations, and I think we've learned that you need to have a lot more trust in each other more than anything else if you really want to solve big problems. And you need to build common purpose upfront. And I think, we've also learned that sometimes one big learning was sometimes you need to set the bar really high. And even if you set the bar really high and you fall short, you'll still land up solving a really big problem. I remember the first time we all got together as a team and we said we will do millions of meals. There was lots of disbelief in the room and in the virtual room. But we landed up doing a little bit less than that, which was still multiple of what anybody thought they believed in. Let me move to the next question, which is a question. Here you go. It's a question which from Seema Paul. There's often a huge overhead for organizations in accepting time, especially those NGOs working on structural and policy changes. Who do you think will pay for that? Those giving time expect and believe that giving time costs NGOs no money and time. Bindi, I know CSIP thinks about a lot of this pretty deeply. Do you want to take it?
Sure, but I think it's a very valid question, and I know why NGOs actually avoid getting volunteers in some sense, because this is true. Like when you give time, sometimes you don't even. I'll give you an example. When I was at Kevalya and the kids, the fellows told me that, this employee volunteer people come in the night, or they come on a Sunday and they paint the walls, and then we have to paint over it because they don't know how to do it right. And so it's always, there is a little situation in between where giving time and giving money is in constant conflict. And I think it's very important, like Ujjwal said, to give time and money. And one is constructive time on where exactly can you give. Like you just don't sort of, I mean, a lot of people from the corporate world tend to come and give gyan and they think they know all the answers. The point need to be somebody like an Ujjwal or Amit who worked in the sector, who know what they're talking about. And those overheads that, Seema is talking about, very important. I mean, considering right now, all the laws that we are looking at, in terms of be the FCRA bill or the CSR Act or, all the money that is now disappearing. Sorry. I think that's the echo from Amit's. But that I think in general, it's a very valid question. I mean, who should pay for it? I think we should pay for it, right? As people who are giving, I mean, in some sense, doing philanthropy in India, I think people need to start thinking. And there is a new initiative, I think Britspan has started, and Amit is a part of it. And they're talking about administrative costs and how much does it cost to actually do the administrative work and this whole overhead you're talking about. And hopefully when we finish that study, there will be a lot more enlightened, Indian givers who will pay for this this overhead. Because even now, I think we get this question of, does every penny that I give go to the ground? And which I think is the stupidest question, because the person who's taking it to the ground, their salary needs to be paid. So very, very important to think that overhead is not actually overhead, it's required. Because without that, the money is not going to go to the ground. So that's sort of my answers.
The simple solution to that question is that treat it as a program expense.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it's operational cost. It's not administrative cost. From any angle. I mean, only people like me are administrative. Rest of everybody is operational. So yeah.
I think we are almost out of time. Let me actually end this with a very simple question to both of you. Are you hopeful with everything which is going on, or what gives you hope?
Yeah, what gives me hope is a better question than are you hopeful? I'm born an optimist, so I continue to be hopeful. But what gives me hope is the youth of this country. They are involved. They can change the face of the world. And there are organizations like Prava and Community which are building them into future leaders. So we need millions of them. We need to build the capacity for youth to get agency and be involved in politics, be in Indian School of Democracy, which we are incubating as a part of that. Build youth leadership, get youth involved, build a moral compass for the youth, and they'll solve the problems. That is my scope. I mean, that's my real reason for hope.
Mindy?
So I'm actually an eternal pessimist. I mean, that's what Ingrid calls me. What I would still say there is hope, and I go with the same thing that Ujjwal said, is the youth of the country. I mean, the millennials that we have right now, I mean, while we, make fun of them and say they don't know what they're talking about, but at some level, I feel they're more socially aware. They know they're looking at the environment, they're reacting to the environment in a positive way and actually raising their voices. And that makes me hopeful to say that, people still care. People have not lost that humanity in them to want to do more. They don't know how. And I think that onus is on us to ensure that we show them the right way to do it how. But there is hope in that sense that something will happen sooner or later to change where we are right now.
Yeah, I would agree with both of you. I think, look, what history has taught us is that the world faces lots of problems periodically, and some really big ones. But I think society finds a way to deal with them. It takes time to come to grips with some of these big problems, but leadership does emerge. And I think at this point of time, hopefully that leadership will emerge from the youth of the country. There will be a new way of thinking. And I agree with both your contentions that actually it is our youth who will basically lead us, out of some of the challenges that we are facing at this point of time. So with that, on this wonderful day of Dan Utsav and Gandhi Jayanti, let's wish everyone to say stay safe, as well as emerge from this pandemic stronger, healthy. And let me thank both of you for having been wonderful panelists on this conversation, on this charcha, and thank the organizers for inviting all three of us. Namaste.
Namaste. Thank you,
Thank
Amit.
you.
Thank you, Bindi.
Thank you.
Photo opportunity.
He turned it off.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Everyone. It was
Ashish.
great.
I got you.
Thank
I
you,
got you
Ashish.
in the picture.
Teacher, I enjoy being out of the picture. जिंदगी शांति में रहती है फिर.
Yeah. I need to take one more picture.
Take one more. Sushant is in as
Yeah.
well.
And Ujjwal,
Yeah.
share it with me. I'll put it online. So
I will.
Shruti, come in the video, please. Shruti, start your video, please.
I'm just eating, so you guys continue.
Yeah.
All the hard work is being done by Ashish. I just came in like 2 days ago and I'm just managing this. But thanks to Ashish.
thank you. Do we just go
Great.
off, or what are we supposed to do?
Thank you
Sushant
so much.
or Ashish?
Yeah.
Before you
it's
boot us
all
out,
over.
we'll go.
It's over.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
guys.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Amit. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.